So this old black man really thinks he can tell the police what we can and can't do? Captain Grant Holloway sneered as he ripped the framed photograph from Isaiah Bennett's hands and hurled it into the mud. The glass shattered beneath his boot. Isaiah froze. Inside that frame was the last photograph he had taken with his late wife, Margaret. "Pick it up," Isaiah said quietly. Holloway stepped closer. "Look around, Bennett. Nobody's coming to save an old man in a worthless house." Then he pointed toward the excavator rumbling behind them. "By sunset, the only proof you ever lived here will be a pile of garbage headed for the landfill." Two officers pulled Isaiah's arms behind his back and locked handcuffs around his wrists. Holloway leaned near his ear. "Maybe watching everything you love get crushed will finally teach you your place." The excavator's steel bucket smashed through the porch. Neighbors shouted in horror. Isaiah watched nearly 40 years of memories collapse into dust. Then the old black veteran slowly turned toward Holloway. "You should stop that machine," Holloway laughed. "Or what?" Isaiah met his eyes. "Because when they learn whose home you destroyed, you'll wish you had." Stay with this story, because Holloway had no idea who he had just humiliated. Comment your city and local time below, and subscribe if you believe dignity should never surrender to power. 3 weeks before the excavator tore into his porch, Isaiah Bennett was standing on the same weathered boards with a mug of black coffee warming his hands. Dawn had barely reached Hawthorne Street, and Ashford Ridge was still quiet enough for him to hear sparrows hopping along the gutter. He looked toward the empty rocking chair beside his own. Margaret had loved that chair, but every room carried a memory. To anyone driving past, it was an aging house. To Isaiah, it was the geography of a marriage. That morning, a glossy envelope waited beneath his mailbox. Final purchase offer was printed across the front. Isaiah. For 6 months, North Star Development had been buying properties along Hawthorne Street. Their proposed luxury complex would bring restaurants, offices, and expensive apartments to the neighborhood. Most homeowners had accepted offers that seemed generous compared with what their houses had been worth 5 years earlier. Isaiah had declined everyone. He carried the envelope inside without opening it, and placed it beside 3 identical envelopes in a kitchen drawer. At 9:30, someone knocked. A young man in a navy suit stood outside holding a leather portfolio. "Mr. Bennett? Daniel Pierce, North Star Development?" "I remember you," Daniel smiled carefully. "Then you know why I'm here." "My answer hasn't changed." "This offer has." Daniel opened his portfolio and showed Isaiah a number. "No." Daniel's smile weakened. "Sir, respectfully, everyone around you is selling. Once construction starts, this street won't be what you remember. It already isn't. Then why stay?" Isaiah looked past him toward Margaret's roses, because leaving and being pushed out are 2 different things. Daniel closed the portfolio. "You may want to reconsider before other issues complicate the property." Isaiah's eyes returned to him. "What issues?" Daniel hesitated. "Have a good morning, Mr. Bennett." He walked away. 2 days later, a patrol cruiser stopped outside Isaiah's house. Captain Grant Holloway stepped out with Officer Emily Carter. Isaiah was repairing a loose fence board. "Isaiah Bennett?" Holloway called. Isaiah set down his hammer. "That's me. We received a complaint about a property line obstruction." Isaiah glanced at the fence. "From whom?" "Doesn't matter. It matters if someone is accusing me of something." Holloway approached the fence. "This section may extend onto an adjoining parcel." "It doesn't." Holloway gave a short laugh. "You a surveyor?" "No, but I paid one." Isaiah went inside and returned with a folder containing a certified survey. Emily accepted it first. She studied the diagram. "Captain, this boundary appears." Holloway took the paper from her. "I'll decide what it appears to be." Emily fell silent. Holloway looked at Isaiah. "You've been receiving offers for this property, haven't you?" That question changed the air. Isaiah studied him. "What does that have to do with a fence complaint?" "I'm asking a question. And I'm asking why a police captain is interested in whether I sell my house." Holloway's jaw tightened. Across the street, Ruth Coleman paused while watering her flowers. Holloway lowered his voice. "Sometimes cooperation makes problems disappear." Isaiah's expression remained calm. "And sometimes that sentence creates problems." Emily looked toward her captain. Holloway stepped closer until only the fence separated them. "You've lived here a long time, Mr. Bennett. Maybe you've gotten comfortable thinking things work the way they used to." Isaiah straightened. His knee hurt that morning, but nothing in his posture revealed it. "The law doesn't become optional because a neighborhood gets expensive." Holloway stared at him. "You're making this harder than necessary." "No, Captain. I'm asking you to keep a property dispute where it belongs." "Careful." "With what?" "With how you speak to me." Isaiah's eyes did not move. I've spoken respectfully. If respect means agreeing with you, then you're asking for obedience. For the first time, Holloway seemed genuinely surprised. Most people in Ashford Ridge apologized when his voice sharpened. Isaiah had not raised his voice at all. That somehow irritated him more. Holloway folded the survey and pushed it against Isaiah's chest. Fix the fence. The survey says it's legal. I said fix it. Isaiah looked down at the document, then back up. Give me a lawful order, and I'll follow it. Give me your opinion, and I'll consider it. Ruth stopped pretending not to listen. Emily pressed her lips together. Holloway's face reddened. You think being old gives you permission to be difficult? No. Isaiah picked up his hammer. Being a citizen gives me permission to ask what authority you're acting under. Holloway stared at him for several seconds. Then he smiled. It was not a friendly smile. You know, Mr. Bennett, people who cooperate usually find life around here pretty easy. Isaiah waited. And people who don't? He asked. Holloway walked backward toward the cruiser. Things get complicated. Emily remained beside the passenger door for a moment. Her eyes met Isaiah's. There was discomfort in them, perhaps even apology, but she said nothing. The cruiser pulled away. Ruth crossed the street immediately. What was that about? A fence, apparently. That wasn't about a fence. Isaiah watched the cruiser disappear around the corner. No, he said. It wasn't. That evening, he sat alone at his kitchen table while sunset filled the room Margaret had painted pale yellow. He opened the drawer containing North Star's offers. For the first time, he noticed something printed in tiny letters on the latest envelope. A municipal redevelopment reference number. Isaiah frowned. He retrieved his reading glasses and copied the number onto a notepad. Then he looked toward an old, locked military trunk beneath the hallway table. For several seconds, his hand rested on the key in his pocket. He did not open it. Not yet. The next morning, Isaiah filed a formal request for every municipal record connected to his property. By noon, Captain Holloway knew about it, and inside his office, staring at Isaiah Bennett's name on his computer screen, Holloway made a quiet decision. If the old man refused to move willingly, he would make staying unbearable. 2 mornings after Isaiah filed his records request, the first patrol cruiser appeared before sunrise. It circled the block twice while Isaiah watched from his kitchen window. By afternoon, another cruiser had stopped beside his curb. The following day, there were 3. No officer knocked. No citation was issued. They simply watched. Isaiah continued his routine, tending Margaret's roses and repairing his backyard gate. On Friday morning, Officer Emily Carter arrived with Officer Mason Pike, a broad-shouldered man in his 30s who seemed eager to prove something. We're conducting a property compliance check, Pike announced. Isaiah looked at the clipboard in his hand. Under whose authority? Pike smirked. Here we go. Emily glanced at him. Mr. Bennett is allowed to ask. Pike ignored her and pointed toward Isaiah's toolbox beside the fence. That can't stay there. Isaiah looked down. I'm repairing the gate. Looks like an obstruction. On my property? Pike kicked the toolbox. It flipped over. Wrenches, screwdrivers, bolts, and an old carpenter's level scattered across the sidewalk. Ruth Coleman gasped from across the street. Isaiah did not move. Pike smiled. Clean it up. Emily stared at him. Mason. What? That wasn't necessary. Isaiah slowly crouched and picked up a wrench. His injured knee protested, forcing him to brace one hand against the fence. Pike watched without helping. Ruth marched across the street. You knocked that over deliberately. Ma'am, stay back. I watched you do it. Ruth, Isaiah said quietly. She stopped. He gathered another tool. Emily crouched beside him and began collecting the scattered bolts. I'm sorry, she whispered. Isaiah looked at her. You didn't kick it. No. Then don't apologize for what another person chooses to do. Decide what you choose to do. Emily held his gaze before placing the bolts carefully inside the box. Pike scoffed, but Emily stood. We're done here. Before leaving, he turned to Isaiah. Captain Holloway says you've been making complaints. I filed one. You might want to learn when to leave things alone. Isaiah closed his toolbox. Tell Captain Holloway I don't communicate through threats delivered by other men. Pike's smile disappeared. That afternoon, Isaiah drove to the municipal building and requested an update on his complaint against Holloway. The clerk searched her computer. I don't see anything. Isaiah slid his receipt beneath the glass. I filed it Monday at 10:14. She typed again. Maybe it hasn't been processed. The receipt says processed. The clerk frowned. Then the complaint suddenly appeared. That's strange. What is? It was moved into an inactive queue. By whom? Her expression changed. I can't see that. Can you print the activity history? I'm not authorized. Isaiah thanked her and left. Isaiah knew paperwork rarely disappeared when nobody benefited. That evening, he recorded every date, name, and exact word in a notebook. 2 nights later, headlights swept across his living room wall. Isaiah checked the clock. 9:43 p.m. Someone knocked hard enough to rattle the door. Captain Grant Holloway stood on the porch alone. Isaiah opened the door but left the screen latched. "Evening, Captain. You've been busy. So have your officers." Holloway glanced toward the neighboring houses. "Can we talk privately?" "We are talking." Holloway's jaw tightened. "You filed a complaint accusing me of misconduct." I described what happened. "You're wasting everyone's time because you're angry about a development project." I never mentioned North Star in my complaint. Holloway paused. Isaiah noticed the hesitation. "Interesting," Isaiah said. "What?" "You seem to know a great deal about a private company for a police captain investigating fences." Holloway stepped closer to the screen. "Listen carefully. You're turning a simple situation into something ugly." "No, I'm documenting what you're doing." "You think a notebook protects you?" "I think truth survives longer when someone writes it down." Holloway laughed softly. "You don't understand this town. I've lived here 38 years, and I've worn this badge for 22. I know judges, inspectors, council members. I know which calls get answered and which complaints end up forgotten." Isaiah's face hardened. Holloway leaned toward him. "No one in Ashford Ridge beats me at this game." Isaiah smiled. "Then maybe no one has made you answer the right questions yet." Holloway's smile vanished. His eyes moved beyond Isaiah into the hallway. A faded photograph showed a younger Isaiah in military uniform beside Margaret. Holloway nodded toward it. "That's supposed to impress me?" "No." "Good, because being some old veteran doesn't make you special." Isaiah's voice remained level. "I never said it did." Holloway looked around the porch. Margaret's wind chime moved softly above them. "You could have taken the money," Holloway said. "Bought yourself someplace easier to maintain. My house isn't your concern. It becomes my concern when you make yourself a problem." There it was. Not law, not safety, punishment. Isaiah stepped closer to the screen. "Captain, if you came here to intimidate me, you should understand something." Holloway waited. "I've met frightening men before. They rarely needed to announce how powerful they were." Holloway's face reddened. "You're going to regret pushing this. Is that an official warning?" "You can call it whatever you want." "No, I'd like you to call it what it is." Then Holloway stepped backward. His gaze traveled slowly over the house, from the porch columns to the roofline. A cold smile returned. "You're right about one thing, Bennett. This isn't about a fence anymore." Isaiah watched him descend the steps. Holloway reached the sidewalk, stopped, and looked back. "I'll find a way to solve the problem." He walked to his cruiser. Isaiah remained on the porch until the taillights disappeared. Across the street, Ruth called, "You should call somebody." Isaiah looked toward the hallway table, where the old photograph stood. Old memories surfaced, but Isaiah looked away. Not yet. He knew Holloway meant it. The next morning, Holloway entered the municipal inspection office carrying a folder. He closed the door behind him. And before noon, a new complaint appeared against Isaiah Bennett's house, this one claiming the structure itself might be unsafe. The complaint against Isaiah Bennett's house became an official inspection order before the end of the day. At 8:15 the next morning, a white municipal vehicle stopped outside his home. Isaiah was already waiting on the porch. 2 building inspectors stepped out carrying clipboards. Behind them came a police cruiser. Captain Grant Holloway emerged from the passenger side. Isaiah looked at him. "I thought this was a building inspection." "It is." "Then why are you here?" Holloway adjusted his jacket. "Public safety." Isaiah almost smiled. "Of course." The senior inspector, Leonard Hayes, approached the porch. "Mr. Bennett, we received a complaint regarding possible structural deficiencies." "What deficiencies?" "We need to inspect before determining that." Isaiah handed him a folder. "My house passed inspection 18 months ago." Hayes studied the paperwork. "I see that. So what changed?" Holloway answered. "Maybe someone finally looked closely." Isaiah ignored him. He allowed the inspectors inside. For nearly 2 hours, Hayes examined the foundation, electrical panel, roof supports, plumbing, and rear addition. Isaiah followed quietly. Holloway followed too. At one point, Hayes tested a support beam. "Some moisture damage," he said. "Dangerous?" Isaiah asked. "Not from what I'm seeing." Holloway looked at him. "You sure?" Hayes straightened. "I'll make my determination after the inspection." When they finished, Isaiah walked them outside. "What happens now?" "I'll file my report," Hayes said. "There are repairs I'll recommend, but I'm not seeing anything that requires immediate evacuation." Isaiah nodded. Thank you. Holloway said nothing, but Emily Carter, standing near the cruiser, noticed the way her captain watched Hayes leave. 3 hours later, Holloway entered the municipal building. That evening, Isaiah received no report. The next morning, he called. "It's still processing," a clerk told him. He called again that afternoon. Same answer. On the third day, someone knocked violently on his door. Isaiah opened it. Holloway stood outside with 4 officers. Emily was among them. Holloway held a red notice. "Your property has been declared structurally unsafe." Isaiah stared at him. "By whom?" "Municipal Inspection. I want the report." "You can request it." "I already did." Holloway attached the notice to Isaiah's door. "You need to leave immediately." Isaiah did not move. "Inspector Hayes told me there was no immediate danger." Holloway shrugged. "Apparently the final report says otherwise." Isaiah looked toward Emily. She avoided his eyes. That told him enough. "I'm calling Hayes." Holloway stepped between Isaiah and the doorway. "You can call whoever you want after you leave. This is my house. And right now it's condemned." Isaiah's expression hardened. "I need 20 minutes. "For what?" "To collect medication, documents, and personal belongings." 10. Isaiah went inside. He packed a small bag. Then he entered the bedroom. Margaret's photographs were stored in a wooden box inside the closet. He reached for it. "Time." Holloway's voice came from the hallway. "I'm not finished." "You are now." Isaiah lifted the box. Holloway blocked the doorway. "That stays." Isaiah stared at him. "These are photographs. Property inside a condemned structure must remain until clearance. You just watched me pick it up. Put it down." Isaiah's grip tightened. Inside were photographs from his wedding. Margaret holding their first Christmas tree. Margaret asleep on the porch. Margaret smiling during the last summer before cancer changed everything. "I'm taking this box." Holloway stepped forward. "That's exactly your problem, Bennett. You think you decide which rules apply to you." "No." Isaiah's voice became colder. "I think you're inventing rules as you need them." Holloway reached for the box. Isaiah pulled it back. 2 officers moved instantly. Emily stepped forward. "Captain, there's no reason." "Stay out of it." Holloway pointed at Isaiah. "Put the box down." Isaiah slowly placed it on the bed. Then he looked Holloway directly in the eyes. "I want it documented that you refused to allow me to remove personal photographs from my condemned home." Holloway laughed. "You think anybody cares about your little collection of memories?" Isaiah's face changed, only slightly, but Emily saw it. Holloway had finally found something that hurt him. Isaiah walked toward the hallway. As he passed Holloway, the captain said quietly, "You should have sold when you had the chance." Isaiah stopped. There was no longer any doubt. He turned. "What did you say?" Holloway realized his mistake. "I said you should have cooperated." "No, you said sold." The officers became silent. Isaiah stepped toward him. "This was never about safety." Holloway's face hardened. "Leave the property." Isaiah reached into his pocket for his phone. "I'm documenting this." Holloway grabbed his wrist. Isaiah pulled back instinctively. That was all Holloway needed. "Cuff him." Emily stared at him. "For what?" "Obstruction." "He didn't obstruct anything." "Officer Carter." The warning in Holloway's voice was unmistakable. Another officer pulled Isaiah's arms behind him. Cold metal closed around his wrists. Across the street, Ruth Coleman ran from her house. "What are you doing?" She lifted her phone and began recording. Isaiah stood handcuffed on the porch he had built with Margaret nearly 4 decades earlier. He did not struggle. He did not shout. Instead, he looked at Emily. "Remember what you saw." Emily swallowed. Holloway escorted Isaiah toward the cruiser. As the door opened, Isaiah looked back at his house. The wooden box remained visible through the bedroom window. Margaret's memories were still inside. That afternoon, Emily returned to the department and searched for Hayes's inspection report. She found it. Her eyes narrowed. The document on the system recommended emergency demolition, but Emily remembered what Hayes had said. No immediate evacuation. No immediate structural danger. She checked the file history. There were 2 versions. Before she could open the earlier one, footsteps approached. Emily closed the screen. Holloway passed behind her without stopping. "Go home, Carter." She waited until he disappeared. Then she reopened the system. The original report was still there. Emily began reading. Across town, Isaiah sat alone in a holding room. For the first time, he wondered how far Holloway was prepared to go. The answer arrived before midnight. Captain Holloway stood inside his office, holding a newly approved emergency demolition authorization. He read Isaiah Bennett's address. Then he smiled. The house was no longer merely going to be condemned. Holloway intended to make sure Isaiah could never return to it. Isaiah Bennett walked out of the Ashford Ridge police station just after 7 the next morning with a plastic bag containing his wallet, keys, and the folded property notice Captain Holloway had watched an officer remove from his pocket. No charges had been filed. That did not make the night feel any less like punishment. Ruth Coleman was waiting beside her old sedan. "You all right?" "I've had better nights." She hugged him before he could object. Then Isaiah looked toward Hawthorne Street. "Take me home." Ruth hesitated. "Isaiah." "I said take me home." 10 minutes later, they turned onto the street. Yellow municipal tape stretched across Isaiah's porch. A red notice had been fixed to the front door. "Unsafe structure. Do not enter." Isaiah stepped out slowly. His house stood exactly as it had the day before. The roof had not collapsed. The windows were intact. The porch still held Margaret's empty rocking chair. Yet someone had decided he could no longer cross his own doorway. Ruth read the notice. "They can't do this." They already did. Isaiah approached the tape but did not cross it. He had spent most of his adult life understanding the difference between courage and recklessness. Holloway wanted him angry. He wanted Isaiah to give him one moment that could be twisted into justification. Isaiah would not provide it. By noon, he was inside the municipal building, filing an emergency appeal. The clerk studied his documents. "The demolition review is scheduled for Thursday." Isaiah frowned. "Today is Tuesday." "Yes, sir." "The notice says I have 10 business days to challenge the order." She looked uncomfortable. "I know. Then why is demolition review happening in 48 hours? I don't set the schedule." "Who does?" Her eyes flicked toward a closed office. "I'm sorry, Mr. Bennett." Isaiah understood. Fear had become an unofficial language in Ashford Ridge. He spent the afternoon calling attorneys. The fourth call produced hope. Attorney Michael Reeves listened carefully and agreed to meet him. When Reeves saw the original inspection paperwork Isaiah had obtained before being removed from his house, his expression changed. "This is unusual." "How unusual?" "The timeline alone is enough for me to request an emergency injunction." "Will you?" Reeves nodded. "Yes." For the first time in days, Isaiah felt something loosen inside his chest. It lasted 6 hours. At 8:17 that evening, Reeves called. "I can't represent you." Isaiah sat upright in Ruth's guest room. "What changed?" "I'm sorry." "You weren't sorry 6 hours ago." Silence. "Michael, I have other clients in Ashford Ridge." There was fear behind the words. Isaiah closed his eyes. "Who contacted you?" "I can't discuss that." "Did Captain Holloway?" Another silence answered him. "I'm sorry, Isaiah." The call ended. Ruth stood in the doorway. "They got to him?" Isaiah placed the phone down. "They frightened him." "Then call somebody who can't be frightened." Isaiah knew exactly what she meant. His old military trunk had been moved to Ruth's garage before the house was sealed. Inside were names and numbers belonging to people whose calls were answered quickly. People who still called him General. Ruth followed him into the garage. Isaiah unlocked the trunk. Photographs rested beneath neatly folded cloth. Letters. Commendations. A photograph of a much younger Isaiah standing before rows of uniformed personnel stretched farther than the camera could comfortably capture. Ruth pointed toward it. "One phone call?" "No." "Why?" "Because Margaret and I came back here to live as ordinary people. They're destroying your life. And if I need an old rank before the law treats me fairly, what happens to someone who doesn't have one?" Ruth had no answer. Isaiah closed the trunk. "I'm fighting this as Isaiah Bennett." Across town, Officer Emily Carter was fighting a quieter battle. She sat alone at a terminal comparing 2 versions of Isaiah's inspection report. The first was signed at 2:14 p.m. It recommended repairs. The second had been uploaded at 5:48 p.m. It recommended emergency demolition. Same inspector. Same property. Different conclusion. Emily checked the document history. Her stomach tightened. The second version had been modified after the inspector's electronic signature. She copied the audit information into her notebook. A voice came from behind her. "Working late?" Emily turned. Holloway stood in the doorway. "Just finishing reports." He walked toward the monitor. "Bennett?" Emily minimized the window. "Routine review." Holloway stared at her. "You're ambitious, Carter." "I trito do my job." "Then learn something early." He leaned against the desk. "Careers don't get destroyed by big mistakes. Usually it's small decisions. Asking questions nobody asked you to ask. Opening files nobody told you to open." Emily's pulse quickened. "Is that advice?" "It's generosity." He walked away. Emily waited until his footsteps disappeared. Then she reopened the audit trail. This time, she saved the information somewhere Holloway could not erase with a keystroke. The following morning, Isaiah returned to Hawthorne Street. Something unusual was parked 2 blocks away. A flatbed truck. On it sat a yellow excavator. Isaiah stopped walking. The demolition hearing was supposed to be tomorrow. Ruth came beside him. They're not even waiting. Isaiah stared at the machine. Then he noticed Holloway standing beside it, speaking with the operator. The captain looked across the distance and saw him. Holloway smiled. Isaiah did not, because now he understood exactly what this was. Not enforcement, not public safety, not procedure. Holloway wanted him to watch. And for the first time since their conflict began, Isaiah wondered whether remaining silent about who he had once been might cost him the only place Margaret still felt close enough to touch. By 8 the next morning, Hawthorne Street no longer looked like a neighborhood. Police cruisers blocked both ends of the road. Yellow tape stretched between utility poles. The excavator Isaiah had seen the previous day now sat directly across from his house, its engine growling. Isaiah approached carrying a folder. Captain Grant Holloway stepped into his path. "You're not authorized beyond this point." Isaiah held up the papers. "My appeal hasn't been heard. The structure presents an immediate danger. According to a report I'm formally challenging." Holloway smiled. "You always have another piece of paper. And you always seem afraid to let anyone read it." Several neighbors had gathered behind the barricade. Phones were already recording. Isaiah pointed toward the house. "At least let me retrieve personal belongings." "Request denied. My wife's photographs are inside. Should have removed them when you had the chance." Isaiah stared at him. "You prevented me from doing that." Holloway shrugged. "Not my problem." Isaiah moved toward the tape. 2 officers blocked him. "Mr. Bennett," Emily Carter said from several yards away, "please don't." Isaiah stopped. "I'm entering my own home long enough to retrieve one wooden box." Holloway stepped forward. "No, you're not. It contains photographs of my wife." For a fraction of a second, something human might have stopped the captain. It didn't. "Cuff him." Emily's head snapped toward Holloway. "Captain, he hasn't—" That was an order. Another officer took Isaiah's arm. Isaiah did not resist as his wrists were pulled behind him. Ruth shouted from the crowd, "He's 72 years old. What is wrong with you?" Holloway ignored her. Then he leaned toward Isaiah. "You could have avoided all of this." Isaiah looked at his house. "No, I could have surrendered to you. That isn't the same thing." Holloway's face hardened. He raised one hand toward the excavator operator. "Start." The machine rolled forward. Isaiah's breathing changed. "Grant." It was the first time he had used Holloway's first name. "Let me get Margaret's box." Holloway looked almost pleased. For weeks he had wanted something from Isaiah that resembled pleading. Now he thought he had it. Maybe watching everything you love get crushed will finally teach you some respect. The excavator bucket rose, then fell. The porch exploded beneath it. Ruth screamed. Emily turned away for a second. Isaiah didn't. He watched every board break. The porch where Margaret had waited for him during thunderstorms disappeared first. The front window shattered next. Then came the living room. The excavator tore through the wall, exposing the pale yellow interior for one terrible moment. Isaiah saw Margaret's rocking chair. Then it vanished beneath falling timber. His eyes filled, but he refused to lower his head. Another strike reached the hallway. A wooden box fell from a shelf and split open beneath collapsing plaster. Photographs scattered through the wreckage. Isaiah recognized Margaret's face on one of them. A track rolled over it. Something inside him broke silently. Holloway watched him. "Now you understand." Isaiah slowly turned. "No, Captain." His voice was almost a whisper. "Someday you will." For the first time, Holloway's smile weakened. By noon, the house was gone. The police removed Isaiah's cuffs only after the excavator stopped. Holloway walked past him without apology. "You have until tomorrow to clear anything remaining on the property." Isaiah looked at the ruins. "You've already taken what you came for." Holloway paused. "What's that?" "The feeling of being powerful." Isaiah met his eyes. "I hope it was worth the price." Holloway walked away. Hours later, after the police left, neighbors crossed the tape carrying gloves, boxes, and shovels. Nobody asked Isaiah whether he wanted help. They simply began. Ruth searched near what had once been the bedroom. Emily returned after her shift, wearing jeans and a plain jacket. She kept her distance initially. Then she saw Isaiah kneeling beside fragments of Margaret's photographs. She joined him. "I'm sorry." Isaiah looked exhausted. "You didn't drive the machine." "I stood there." That answer carried more pain. Isaiah studied her. "Then decide what standing there means tomorrow." Emily nodded. A few minutes later, Ruth called from beneath a collapsed section of flooring. "Isaiah." They hurried over. She pulled a dented metal case from the debris. Isaiah stopped. For the first time that day, genuine alarm crossed his face. Ruth brushed dust from it. "I thought this was in your trunk." "Not that one." The lock had broken. The lid opened. Emily saw photographs first. Isaiah, decades younger, wearing a decorated military uniform. Then another photograph. Isaiah stood before rows upon rows of uniformed men and women extending into the distance. Emily picked up an old letter. Her eyes moved across the page. Then she looked at Isaiah differently, not because of the medals, because she finally understood how deliberately he had hidden them. Mr. Bennett, Isaiah took the letter gently from her. Please close the box. Emily didn't move. Another photograph showed Isaiah addressing an enormous formation. There were thousands. Ruth watched Emily's expression. Emily whispered, "Who exactly is Mr. Bennett?" Ruth looked toward Isaiah, the destroyed house, and Margaret's photographs scattered in the dirt. Then she answered quietly, "Someone your captain should have treated with dignity even if he were nobody." Isaiah closed the metal case, but 20 miles away, a former soldier had just received a video of the demolition. He watched it twice. Then he reached for his phone, and suddenly, the secret Isaiah had protected for years was no longer entirely his to keep. By the following morning, the video had crossed Ashford Ridge. Someone had recorded the moment Captain Grant Holloway ordered the excavator forward while Isaiah Bennett stood handcuffed beside a patrol cruiser. The clip spread quickly. People were asking why police officers had restrained a 72-year-old veteran while his home was demolished. Holloway responded the way powerful men often did when the truth became inconvenient. He changed the story. At 10 that morning, the police department released a statement describing Isaiah as an uncooperative property owner whose behavior had complicated enforcement of an emergency safety order. By noon, Holloway was standing before local cameras. "This was never personal," he said. Mr. Bennett repeatedly refused lawful instructions concerning a dangerous structure. Isaiah watched the interview from a small room inside the Ashford Ridge Community Center. Everything he still owned fit inside 4 cardboard boxes. Ruth switched off the television. "That man is lying." Isaiah sat on the edge of the narrow bed. "He's frightened." "Frightened? Men like Holloway don't control the truth. They control who gets heard first." Ruth looked toward the boxes. "Then speak." Isaiah remained silent. He had spent the morning sorting through what neighbors had recovered. A watch. 3 photographs. Margaret's chipped coffee mug. A Bible swollen with rainwater. But one thing was missing. A handwritten letter Margaret had left him shortly before she died. Isaiah had kept it inside the wooden box. Holloway refused to let him retrieve. He remembered one line perfectly. "Your uniform was never the reason people followed you." Isaiah closed his eyes. For the first time since the conflict began, he looked tired enough to be 72. Across town, Emily Carter was summoned into Holloway's office. The captain dropped a transfer notice onto his desk. "Effective immediately, you're moving to administrative vehicle inventory." Emily stared at him. "I'm patrol." "Not anymore." "Why?" "You've demonstrated questionable judgment." "Because I checked an inspection report?" Holloway leaned back. "You accessed material unrelated to your assignment. The document had been altered after the inspector signed it." Silence filled the office. Holloway's eyes hardened. "You should be very careful about making accusations you can't prove." Emily placed both hands on his desk. "I can prove the timestamps." His expression changed for half a second. That was enough. Emily knew. "You already knew," she whispered. Holloway stood. "Hand over everything you copied." "I followed department procedure." "Everything, Carter." Emily removed a folder from her bag and placed it on the desk. Holloway opened it. "Printouts. Notes. Nothing more." He smiled. "Good decision." Emily left without answering. What Holloway did not know was that she had already preserved the original audit information through an authorized evidence retention channel that recorded when and why the material had been secured. If Holloway tried to erase the original file now, he would create another trail. That afternoon, Holloway announced a press conference for the following morning. He intended to end the controversy. Instead, he pushed Isaiah further than he realized. At the community center, Ruth entered Isaiah's room carrying her phone. "You need to see this." Holloway was giving another interview. This time, he was attacking the neighbors who had defended Isaiah. "These activists are spreading misinformation," Holloway said. "Some individuals are exploiting an elderly man's confusion to create outrage." Isaiah's eyes narrowed. "Confusion?" Ruth nodded bitterly. "He's making you sound senile." Then Holloway continued, "We will not allow a small group of agitators to undermine public safety." Isaiah stood. Ruth noticed the change immediately. Holloway could insult him. He could mock his house. He could even destroy his possessions. But now he was targeting ordinary people whose only offense had been helping an old neighbor search through the ruins. Isaiah walked toward the window. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. Isaiah Bennett. A familiar voice came through. Sir. Isaiah closed his eyes. He had not heard that voice in nearly 4 years. Thomas. Retired Colonel Thomas Reed did not waste words. I saw the video. Isaiah said nothing. Half the people I served with have seen it too. I don't want anyone coming here. With respect, sir, that decision may no longer belong entirely to you. It absolutely does. Thomas paused. You taught us never to confuse restraint with surrender. I also taught you not to turn personal anger into a mission. This isn't personal anger. Isaiah looked at the cardboard boxes. What do you want? To bring the truth. No uniforms, no spectacle, no intimidation. Understood. And nobody threatens Holloway. Thomas almost sounded offended. You know me better than that. I know several thousand people who still think they owe me something. They do. They don't. Isaiah's voice softened. They gave enough. Thomas remained quiet. Then he asked, Do you want us to stay away? Isaiah almost said yes. On Ruth's phone, Holloway's interview continued. He called the neighbors irresponsible. He questioned Emily's professionalism without naming her. Then he announced tomorrow's press conference would prove the demolition had been justified. Isaiah looked toward Ruth. She had risked being arrested simply for standing beside him. Emily had risked her career. Other neighbors had spent hours digging through broken wood to recover pieces of a life that was not theirs. This was no longer only about his house. Isaiah returned to the phone. Thomas. Yes, sir? Bring the truth. A pause. Nothing else. Thomas understood. Yes, sir. The call ended. Ruth stared at Isaiah. Who was that? An old friend. How old? Isaiah almost smiled. Old enough to remember when my knees worked. 3 hours away, Thomas Reed stood inside a quiet Veterans Association hall. Around him were photographs from decades of service. He made one call, then another. He did not ask anyone to bring weapons. He did not ask anyone to protest. He simply said, General Bennett needs witnesses. By sunset, the message had traveled across Virginia and beyond. Former officers, retired enlisted leaders, military physicians, logistics specialists, men and women who had once stood under Isaiah Bennett's command. Some had become teachers. Some owned businesses. Some worked in government. Others were simply grandparents now. They began arranging rides to Ashford Ridge. Meanwhile, Holloway stood at the demolished property rehearsing tomorrow's press conference. He had ordered a podium placed where Isaiah's porch had once stood. He wanted cameras to see him controlling the ground. He had no idea what was moving toward him. Back at the community center, Isaiah opened the dented metal case. He removed one photograph. Thousands of uniformed men and women stood in formation beneath a wide Virginia sky. Isaiah was at the front. He stared at the younger version of himself. Then he turned the photograph face down. Tomorrow, Holloway wanted to teach Ashford Ridge who held power. Isaiah intended to teach him something different. That authority could silence a man temporarily. It could handcuff him. It could destroy his house. But when enough people were willing to stand beside the truth, authority could no longer decide what the truth was. And before Holloway's press conference ended, the entire town would finally learn who Isaiah Bennett had once been. At 9 the next morning, Captain Grant Holloway stepped behind a podium planted where Isaiah Bennett's porch had once stood. Behind him lay the ruins. Broken boards, crushed furniture, splintered walls. Holloway had chosen the location deliberately. He wanted the destruction behind him to look like evidence of authority. Local reporters crowded near the curb. Isaiah arrived wearing the same faded brown work jacket he had worn before his home was destroyed. Ruth walked beside him. Whispers moved through the crowd. Holloway noticed him immediately. Well, he said into the microphone, Mr. Bennett decided to join us. Several cameras turned. Isaiah stopped among his neighbors. Holloway smiled. This department has been accused of targeting an elderly veteran. Those accusations are false. He raised a folder. The property was declared an immediate danger. Mr. Bennett repeatedly refused lawful instructions, obstructed officers, and contributed to an already difficult situation. Isaiah said nothing. Holloway continued. Emotional videos do not change facts. No, a woman's voice called from behind the reporters. But altered documents do. Every head turned. Emily Carter walked toward the podium carrying a sealed evidence folder. Holloway's face changed. Officer Carter, this is an official press conference. I know. You were ordered to stay away from this investigation. I was reassigned after discovering evidence. Reporters immediately raised microphones. Holloway stepped down. Emily, think carefully. I have. She opened the folder. The original inspection report for Mr. Bennett's house did not recommend demolition. The crowd erupted. Holloway raised his voice. That is incorrect. Emily held up a document. This version was electronically signed at 2:14 p.m. It recommended repairs and temporary monitoring. She produced another. At 5:48 p.m., a second version appeared recommending emergency demolition. Holloway pointed toward her. You accessed records outside your assignment. The audit trail was preserved through authorized evidence retention. That sentence stopped him. Emily continued. The inspector's electronic signature appears on both versions, but the demolition language was added after that signature was created. Reporters began shouting questions. Holloway returned to the microphone. This proves nothing except an administrative revision. Emily looked directly at him, then explained the email. Silence. She removed another page. A municipal official forwarded the revised demolition recommendation shortly after receiving correspondence concerning the North Star redevelopment project. Isaiah's expression hardened. Holloway stared at Emily. You have no idea what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing. Ruth stepped closer to Isaiah. That's the first time I've seen him scared. Isaiah watched Holloway carefully. He should be scared of the evidence, not us. A reporter shouted, Captain Holloway, did North Star Development influence the demolition? No. Did you communicate with anyone connected to the project? This conference is over. Holloway reached for his folder. Then a sound came from the far end of Hawthorne Street. Engines. Everyone turned. A line of vehicles approached slowly. Not military trucks, not government convoys, ordinary cars, pickup trucks, minivans, or sedans. They parked along both sides of the street. Doors opened. Men and women stepped out. Some wore suits. Others wore jeans or simple veterans' jackets. Most were older. Nobody carried signs. Nobody shouted. They simply walked toward the demolished house. Holloway stared. What is this? Isaiah closed his eyes briefly. Ruth looked at him. You knew they were coming. I knew some were. How many? Isaiah opened his eyes. Apparently Thomas still has trouble with small numbers. Dozens of people now lined Hawthorne Street. Then dozens more. Holloway signaled to two officers. Keep them behind the barricade. The officers hesitated. The newcomers stopped voluntarily before reaching it. A tall, silver-haired man stepped forward. Thomas Reed. Holloway approached him. This is a restricted area. State your business. Thomas looked past him toward Isaiah. We came for him. Holloway glanced back and laughed nervously. For Bennett? Thomas ignored him. He walked to the barricade and stopped. His posture changed. Shoulders back. Chin level. The conversations around him faded. Thomas looked directly at Isaiah. General Bennett. Holloway's smile disappeared. Isaiah remained still. Then another person straightened, and another. Across Hawthorne Street, men and women who had driven hours to stand there silently came to attention. Holloway looked from face to face. What the hell is this? Nobody answered him. A reporter whispered, Did he say general? Emily slowly turned toward Isaiah. She had seen the photographs. Now she understood them. Thomas spoke clearly. Major General Isaiah Bennett, sir. The street went completely silent. Holloway stared at the old black man he had handcuffed, the man whose photograph he had mocked, the man whose home he had ordered destroyed. No, Holloway muttered. He said he was a veteran. Isaiah finally stepped forward. I am. Thomas almost smiled. Holloway looked around at the people standing at attention. How many of these people served with you? Isaiah did not answer. Thomas did. Enough to know what kind of man you tried to break. Holloway's face drained of color, but Isaiah immediately raised one hand. Thomas. Thomas fell silent. Isaiah walked toward Holloway. There was no triumph in his expression, no revenge, only disappointment. My rank has nothing to do with whether what you did was wrong. Holloway swallowed. Behind Isaiah, more former service members were still arriving. The secret was out now. But the worst part for Holloway was not discovering that Isaiah Bennett had once commanded thousands. It was what Emily's evidence was about to prove. Because Isaiah's identity could embarrass Holloway, the documents could destroy him. And the next truth revealed on Hawthorne Street would show everyone that the demolition had never been about public safety at all. The silence on Hawthorne Street lasted only seconds. Then every reporter began speaking at once. Major General? Captain Holloway, did you know? General Bennett, how many troops did you command? Isaiah raised one hand. The questions slowly faded. My name is Isaiah Bennett, he said. I served my country for more than 35 years. I retired as a major general. A reporter stepped forward. What was your command? Isaiah hesitated. Thomas Reed answered from behind the barricade. At its largest, General Bennett was responsible for thousands of service members across multiple units and support operations. Holloway looked sick. 3 weeks earlier, he had mocked Isaiah as an insignificant old veteran. Now, dozens of people who had once served under Isaiah stood silently behind him. But Isaiah turned toward the cameras. "If you make my rank the story, you will miss the point." Everyone quieted. What happened here would not become more wrong if I had never worn a uniform. His eyes moved toward Holloway. "The problem is not that Captain Holloway did this to a retired general." Holloway looked down. "The problem is that he believed he could do it to anyone." Thomas watched Isaiah with the same respect he had shown decades earlier. Isaiah continued, "A widow should not need medals to keep her home. A mechanic should not need powerful friends before his complaint is heard. An old man should not need thousands of former soldiers standing behind him before someone decides his dignity matters." Even several officers lowered their eyes. Emily stepped forward again. "And that isn't the only issue." She opened the evidence folder. The reporters moved closer. The original inspection report found maintenance concerns, but none requiring immediate demolition. She held up the second report. This version changed that conclusion. Holloway suddenly spoke. "You're presenting incomplete information." Emily looked at him. "Then complete it." His jaw tightened. She continued. "The modification occurred after the inspector electronically signed the document." A reporter asked, "Who modified it?" "The audit trail identifies credentials connected to the Municipal Property Compliance Office." Holloway exhaled. "That has nothing to do with me." Emily removed another sheet. "This might." Holloway froze. 3 days before the demolition order, Captain Holloway exchanged communications with Deputy Municipal Administrator Raymond Voss. She read only the relevant details. The messages discussed Isaiah's refusal to sell and the redevelopment timetable. Another message referred to the Bennett property as the remaining obstacle on Hawthorne. Murmurs swept through the crowd. Ruth covered her mouth. Isaiah did not move. Emily lifted another document. Voss had also communicated with representatives connected to North Star Development. A reporter shouted, "Was the police department being used to pressure a homeowner into selling?" Holloway stepped toward the microphone. "No, absolutely not." Emily faced him. "Then why did you tell Mr. Bennett that people who cooperate have easier lives?" Holloway stared at her. "And why?" she continued. "Did you tell him his life would become complicated?" "That conversation is being misrepresented. Your body camera recorded part of it." Holloway's face lost what little color remained. Emily had not known the recording existed until she searched the evidence index. Holloway's own device had captured enough of his words during one confrontation to establish a pattern. A reporter asked, "Captain, did you say the demolition would teach him respect?" Holloway looked toward Isaiah. Several phones had recorded that sentence. There was nowhere left to hide it. "This was a difficult enforcement situation," Holloway said. "Words can sound different without context." Isaiah finally approached him. "Then give them the context." Holloway said nothing. "Tell them what danger required you to handcuff me while my home was destroyed." "Silence." "Tell them why I couldn't retrieve my wife's photographs." "Nothing." "Tell them why you needed me to watch." Holloway's eyes shifted toward the cameras. Isaiah's voice became quieter. "You wanted me afraid of you." That sentence landed harder than shouting could have. "You thought fear was respect." Holloway whispered, "You don't know what I thought." "I know what you showed me." 2 senior city officials had arrived during the confrontation. One stepped through the crowd and quietly spoke with another department supervisor. Moments later, the supervisor approached Holloway. "Captain, surrender your badge and department. Issued equipment pending administrative investigation." Holloway stared at him. "You're suspending me because he's a general?" Isaiah answered before anyone else could. "No." He stepped closer. "They're suspending you because of what the evidence says you did." Holloway looked at the former service members lining the street. For weeks, he had believed Isaiah's calmness came from weakness. Now he understood. Isaiah had spent decades carrying authority greater than anything Holloway had ever possessed. Yet he had returned home and asked only to be treated like everyone else. Holloway slowly removed his badge. The metal looked strangely small in his hand. Thomas watched without satisfaction. Emily looked relieved, but not triumphant. Isaiah looked toward the ruins of his house. This was justice beginning. It was not restoration. Nothing could return Margaret's photographs exactly as they had been. No investigation could rebuild the years contained inside those walls. Thomas approached him. "Sit." Isaiah shook his head gently. "Isaiah." Thomas smiled. "Isaiah." Behind them, Holloway was escorted away from the podium he had placed on the ruins to demonstrate his power. Before leaving, he looked back. Isaiah was kneeling in the dirt, not celebrating, not watching Holloway. He had spotted something beneath a broken floorboard. A small piece of folded paper. Isaiah carefully lifted it. The edges were torn and stained, but he recognized Margaret's handwriting immediately. His hands began trembling. Only one complete sentence remained readable. "The strongest thing you ever gave people was the courage to stand." Isaiah closed his eyes. Ruth placed a hand on his shoulder. Around them stood neighbors, reporters, officers, and men and women who had traveled across the state because Isaiah Bennett had once stood for them. Now they stood for him, but the investigation was only beginning, because the evidence connecting Holloway to the altered demolition order was about to expose something larger than one abusive captain. And when the final consequences reached Ashford Ridge, Isaiah would face a choice no one expected. What to do with the land where Margaret's house had once stood. 4 months later, Hawthorne Street sounded like a neighborhood again. Hammers struck wood. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalk. Margaret's roses, rescued from the edge of the demolished property and replanted by Ruth Coleman, had begun producing new leaves. The investigation had changed Ashford Ridge. Captain Grant Holloway's suspension became permanent after investigators confirmed that his actions toward Isaiah had crossed far beyond legitimate enforcement. The evidence showed a pattern. Holloway had used police authority to intimidate Isaiah after he refused to sell his property. His conversations with Deputy Municipal Administrator Raymond Voss established that the demolition had become connected to pressure surrounding the North Star redevelopment project. Voss resigned before disciplinary proceedings concluded. Additional investigations followed. The employee responsible for modifying the inspection report was removed from his position after admitting that pressure had been applied to accelerate the demolition process. North Star's proposed development was suspended while its communications with local officials were reviewed. But Isaiah refused to turn the story into a celebration of destroyed careers. "Accountability isn't revenge," he told Ruth one morning. "If we confuse those two things, we learn nothing." His civil case ended with a substantial settlement. The city offered to rebuild his house entirely at public expense. Isaiah accepted, but he had one condition. He stood before the city council holding a simple architectural drawing. "I don't need a bigger house," he said. "I need the one you took from me." The new house would follow the original footprint as closely as modern building standards allowed. Same porch, same kitchen window, same pale yellow living room Margaret had chosen decades earlier. But Isaiah had another request. He owned a narrow adjoining section of land that North Star had desperately wanted. He would not sell it. Instead, he donated its use to a non-profit organization. 6 months after the demolition, construction began on the Margaret Bennett Community Advocacy Center. It would provide free assistance to elderly homeowners, veterans, widows, and low-income residents facing questionable property enforcement or housing disputes. Ruth cried when Isaiah showed her the sign. "You named it after Margaret." Isaiah looked toward the new house. "She would have made me do something useful with all this trouble." Officer Emily Carter experienced changes of her own. An independent review determined that she had preserved evidence properly and acted within authorized procedures. Her punitive reassignment was reversed. When she visited Isaiah after returning to patrol, she stood awkwardly on the newly completed porch. "I keep thinking about that day," she admitted. "The demolition?" Emily nodded. "I should have done more." Isaiah handed her a cup of coffee. "You did something. Eventually." That word describes most courage. Emily looked at him. He continued. "People imagine courage arrives fully formed. Usually it starts with discomfort. Then somebody decides they can't keep pretending they don't see what's happening." Emily smiled. "I think I understand why people followed you." Isaiah shook his head. "Don't ruin my retirement." Months later, former members of Isaiah's command returned to Hawthorne Street for the opening of the Advocacy Center. There were no military ceremonies. Isaiah had insisted on that. No formal formations, no speeches about his rank. Thomas Reed arrived early and found Isaiah repairing one of Margaret's restored flower boxes. "You know they sell new ones," Thomas said. "This one survived." "Barely." "So did I." Thomas laughed. By afternoon, the street was full. Neighbors stood beside veterans. City employees stood beside homeowners. Emily came in uniform, but remained near the back. Inside the center, one wall displayed no medals and no photographs of Isaiah commanding thousands. Instead, it carried a single sentence: "Dignity should never require credentials." When Isaiah stepped forward to speak, the crowd became quiet. He looked toward his rebuilt home. "There was a time when I believed the worst thing they took from me was that house." He paused. "I was wrong. They tried to take something more important. They tried to convince me that power could decide how much dignity I was allowed to have." Ruth wiped her eyes. Isaiah continued, "A house can be rebuilt. A position can be replaced. Money can sometimes compensate for what was lost. His voice softened. But when people are taught that they must become important before they deserve respect, something much more dangerous has been damaged. He looked toward Emily. Captain Holloway didn't make his greatest mistake because he failed to recognize a retired general. Thomas nodded slowly. His greatest mistake was believing he needed to recognize one before treating an old man fairly. Applause rose across Hawthorne Street. Isaiah waited until it faded. This center exists for the person who doesn't have thousands of people ready to come when they call. That evening, after everyone had left, Isaiah returned to his porch. The reconstructed house was not exactly the same. Nothing rebuilt ever was. But Margaret's rocking chair had been repaired. Her chipped coffee mug sat on the small table between the chairs. The damaged metal case remained inside. Isaiah had never polished it. The dents were part of its story now. On the table beside him rested the surviving fragment of Margaret's letter. Thomas walked up the steps carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Isaiah. "Beautiful place, General." Isaiah gave him a look. Thomas smiled. "Sorry. Habit." Isaiah leaned back. "Around here, Isaiah is enough." Thomas sat beside him. For a while, neither man spoke. Across the adjoining property, lights glowed inside the Margaret Bennett Community Advocacy Center. A woman and her elderly father were leaving after meeting with a volunteer about a housing dispute. Isaiah watched them reach their car. Thomas followed his gaze. "Worth it?" Isaiah thought about the question. Nothing could make losing Margaret's photographs worthwhile. Nothing could justify Holloway's cruelty. But something meaningful had grown from what remained. "No," Isaiah said. Thomas looked surprised. Isaiah continued. "What happened wasn't worth it." Then he looked toward the illuminated center. "But what we chose to build afterward was—" The evening breeze moved through Margaret's roses. Months earlier, Holloway had stood on this property believing an excavator could teach Isaiah Bennett his place. He had destroyed walls. He had crushed furniture. He had reduced nearly 40 years of memories to debris. But he had misunderstood something fundamental. A home could be demolished. A title could be forgotten. A uniform could be placed inside a locked trunk. But dignity belonged to the person carrying it, and no badge, bulldozer, office, or position of power could take it away without that person's permission. Isaiah lifted his coffee as the sun disappeared beyond Hawthorne Street. For the first time since Margaret died, the empty chair beside him did not make the porch feel quite so lonely. Sometimes justice could not restore what had been destroyed, but it could make sure the destruction meant something. And sometimes the strongest answer to cruelty was not revenge. It was building something powerful enough to protect the next person. Never judge someone's worth by their age, clothes, home, or the title you think they hold. Real dignity does not come from rank, wealth, or authority. It belongs to every human being. Isaiah's story reminds us that true strength is not revenge, but using injustice to protect others. Tell us what this story meant to you in the comments, and subscribe for more stories where dignity and justice prevail.